Barratt and I'm the Artistic Director of the National Youth Jazz Collective. Welcome to our hashtag National Youth Jazz Wednesday. And we're thrilled today. We're going to be talking to two alumni, alumni, I never did do Latin, two very young and gifted musicians who are really taking the scene by storm, who were part of NYJC in its very early days and have gone on to, one has gone on to be one of our tutors as well. But before we do that, Nick, do you want to come to the platform and say a quick hello? How are you doing, Nick?
Hello, good evening, everybody, and welcome to hashtag National Youth Jazz Wednesday.
So you're our programme manager extraordinaire.
I am indeed. I'm not sure about the extraordinaire bit.
So I was fascinated when we had a little mini catch-up at 4 o'clock. There were a few things you said in passing that I had no idea. I was like, I had no idea that was happening. One of the things is that the summer school, which is happening 22nd to the 29th of August, and when's the deadline for the application?
It's the 28th of February, so 18 days to go to get your application in.
And the audition tour is going to be over the Easter fortnight, we hope. We've got a plan B. If we're still in lockdown, we're going to do it during the half-term week, plus a few weekends later in May and June. But you mentioned something about The Guardian.
Yes, so we have been in touch with the press this year to try and really spread NYJC's summer school message, because we really appreciate how important it is this summer to get young musicians together. So we're trying to spread that message as far and wide, and using places like The Guardian and the BBC to try and spread that message. So if anyone knows anything and put a word in for us there, then please do and help us spread the message.
Definitely pass it on. And I got a text yesterday from one of the one of the finalists of the Young Jazz Musician of the Year, BBC. So we've got two of them joining us later on in April to talk about that experience. So Alex Clark and Ralph Perrett. And Ralph said to me that he'd been working with the CBSO and Alan Titchmarsh, and he was really bigging up NYJC. So everybody's with us and on our side as we champion our way through this COVID experience. We're soon going to be out. I know we are. I can feel it. I can already hear the sounds that we're going to share. So talking of sounds we're going to share, shall we welcome to the stage our two guests today? First of all, Alex Paxton. Hello, Alex.
Hello.
And how's it feel to know that next year it's our 15th birthday and you were in the very first cohort when it was a pilot summer school, 2007? So, and I remember running into you and you said, NYJC, it's a thing. So how's that feel?
How does it feel?
Yeah,
it feels it's a thing, and it's nostalgic, and it's great. So yeah, I'm really pleased it's a thing.
What was your experience of NYJC? You joined us, you auditioned for 2007 and we went to Leeds. So where were you in your journey? What sort of year group were you in and how did it feel to audition and what was the summer school like?
I was 16 and I remember the audition. I remember meeting Laura Jerd at the audition, who I still enjoy meeting and working with occasionally. And I remember, yeah, it was great. It was the first time, I think it was the first kind of touch base point of serious musical education for me. So that was really important.
And it was the first opportunity on a national level that young musicians of the same level of ability and the same sort of passion for the music could come together. And I think that's the legacy that is carrying on now for every year group, every cohort. They still keep in touch, they're still working together. And what about the environment? Were you nervous about the environment? Did you expect it to be competitive? Did it feel inclusive, exclusive?
It definitely, it was, in hindsight, I can see that it was a great environment. I think when I was 16, I wasn't yet sure how to communicate with people. So I think I was probably quite intimidated by the social aspect of that week. Was probably quite an intensive thing for me. But I did learn how to communicate with people eventually, but not on that week specifically. I think I had to wait another couple of years.
And musically?
Musically, I think I was only comfortable playing the trombone, strangely, from perhaps 10 years after that, being really comfortable playing and communicating with people on the trombone, and perhaps musically I started to feel some comfort in that respect, maybe around 20. So, but it was an important start.
I was going to say, was that an important part of the journey? You know, did it help towards what you finally found?
Yeah, certainly. I think it was so valuable because it was the first point where it's not just some weird person who plays jazz trombone in the school, you know, in the school community, but it was a wider community of musicians. I don't think I'd met anybody like all the people that I've met there before. So that was really important. Yeah, certainly.
So when we did that summer school, it was seen by the funders. Youth Music invited us to set that summer school up. I was at the time head of jazz at Trinity, so I knew it was going to be a success because I'd been doing all these auditions for the sort of conservatoire level, and I'd consulted with all the first years at all the conservatoires and said, how on earth did you get to play to this level when there is nothing in place on a national level? But it was great that they were very excited about the outcome of the summer school and wanted to fund it again. But I actually said to them, no, hold your horses, because I don't feel that we're truly national. I've seen from the audition tour that there are different areas that are already, there's quite a lot of jazz activity, but there are other regions that have got nothing, and the youngsters are going to come back next year to audition with the same enthusiasm, but nothing's going to help them on a local level to help them actually pass the audition, you know. So I actually suggested for 2 years we go around and set up our regional hubs, and they really bought into that, Youth Music. So 2008, 2009, and then 2010, it was time to bring the summer school back again. And I'd like to welcome to the stage one of the participants on that summer school. So in effect, you're both the first 2 summer schools, even though it's sort of 4 years apart. So Ralph Wyld, come and join us.
Hello.
Hello, Ralph. Good to see you.
You too.
And so same question as to Alex, where were you in your journey? What age were you? How did you feel about the summer school and the audition, and what part did it all play in your musical journey?
Well, I guess I was, can't remember how old I was, but I do remember that when I saw the first summer school come up, and I came and auditioned for that. And I wasn't successful that time around, but I kind of waited and waited. I was keeping an eye out for when the next one came up.
Oh, I had no idea. That's amazing.
Yeah. So I waited, and when the next set of auditions came around, I went along, and the second time I was successful, which was great. It had a massive impact on me. I mean, by that point I was a member of the National Youth Orchestra, so I was doing national groups and summer schools and that kind of environment. But I was kind of shocked when I turned up to NYJC just to see the energy for music making and the way that everyone was making music all the time. NYO was a fantastic experience as well, but it was very much at that point there wasn't a lot going on outside of the rehearsals for me. I found it's so intense doing the rehearsals with everyone, and you're all focused towards this one very specific thing at the end of the residency. And then I turned up at NYJC, and there was just music going on all the time, and you go in this room and there's some people playing, and then you shut the door and open another door and there's all this going on, and it was just kind of an explosion of activity and creativity. It was great.
Brilliant. And that same year, just as I had said, 2008 and 9, we need to just hold our horses and set up the regional work so that people who really haven't got access have got some support to help them to eventually get on the summer school. When you joined us in 2010, that was the first year that we did the short course, because I was meeting some really strong musicians who might have, almost perfect pitch, fantastic technical skill on the instrument, but had no access to playing jazz to the level that they needed to get on the summer school. So again, the short course is a feeder, and people watching, about 60% of the people that do the short course then get on to the summer school. So by 2011, which was the second year that you then did the summer school, I think, I felt as an artistic director that all the pieces were finally in place, that we've got the regional support, that we've got the feeder short course, and then we got the summer school, and you could already see those progression routes. So let's fast forward now, because we're not going to leapfrog over and miss things out. But I think for people to meet you musically, it would be lovely to now take a bit of a breather and to share the first of the 2 videos that both of you have sent, so we can have a listen. So Alex, might you introduce your first piece, and then Nick's going to take it away and share it with everybody.
This is a piece called Odd Oddie Pinkard, and it's an excerpt from a 10-minute piece I wrote for symphony orchestra and myself playing as an improviser. So all the orchestral parts are written out and all the me parts are improvised. And I quite like a few things about this piece, and this is the first 10 minutes of it, first 3 minutes of it.
Brilliant. So we'll take ourselves off video so that you can get the full experience, and we'll see you in 3 minutes. Take it away, Nick. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Hello, Nick. Are you there?
Hello, yes, I am.
That was a bit of an abrupt ending. Is everything okay technically?
Yes, there was just a bit of a glitch there, but I think we'll be all good for the next one.
Yeah,
Apologies for
sometimes
that.
our Wi-Fi is a bit hiccupy, isn't it? So brilliant. Come back, Ralph. Alex, that was fabulous. And I'm wondering what's the sound world that you've been delving in that gave you that backdrop to improvise over?
Thanks
what-
for listening.
Brilliant. I want to hear more.
That's exactly what I wanted you to. I'll send more. The sound world. It's very difficult, I'm afraid, to answer that question in a straightforward way. I think it's a culmination of lots of things, and some things are more obvious than others in the sound of it. But I think in terms of influence,
Yeah,
there's a lot of what I wanted to say generally, which is a more complicated answer. There's also a lot of orchestral writing in there that comes from kind of orchestral canon of listening. So I was trying to write something that I felt was really me and really what I wanted to say, but also I wanted it to be idiomatic for the orchestra in that piece.
So-
Perhaps in other opportunities where you can write for contemporary musicians who want to contort everything, but actually this was a piece that could be got together by a classical music orchestra. So I was really thinking about the relationship between what I wanted to say and my musical language, and how that can fit in with the musical language that 60 classical musicians could understand.
And with that in mind, you obviously, that doesn't come from nowhere. So you've obviously been doing a lot of intensive listening to orchestral music that's of a sort of contemporary nature. So who are the main influences that people are hearing? Because it may be that they can't make that reference, that cross reference themselves. So who would you say is sort of shining through as an influence, giving you the big thumbs up?
Well, earlier when I was studying at college, I definitely was I would fall in love with the composer's music. And so there is some big influence of some people that I was really, and I'd have like a loving, almost monogamous relationship with their music. But now I'm not ready for a relationship, and I'm just trying to listen to as much as possible.
But who are those people?
Those people. Well, in my music generally, a lot of jazz music and Ellington and early jazz and Jelly Roll Morton and Django Bates, I definitely had a love affair with his music. And then there were kind of, when I studied composition, classical composition, there were these kind of modernistic like composers like Rebecca Saunders,
Oh yeah,
Burt Whistle, and Gerald Barry, and then since then there are other composers on one kind of quite surface level. I haven't listened to a lot of this person's music, but there's in terms of orchestral music that's explicitly happy. People like Richard Ayres, and there's a composer called Ryan Latimer. They write orchestral music that's explicitly happy. Off the top of my head, that's something like that. And I also I think a big presence of people like polystylistic people like John Zorn or someone like that, even though it sounds different, but a lot of the way the music has developed and my listening has developed would be related to that kind of experimental American composers. And also oral tradition music is the music that I still have loving relationships with now, even though I listen to a lot more in the other side. When I was younger, in my 20s, sometimes as a composer, I'm sure you'd know this and Ralph would know this as well, it's hard to listen to lots of music if you know you're going to have to write music in the same day. It's like you need some clear headspace. So and a lot of composers think like that at all stages of their creative life.
I think authors as well. I remember Rose Tremaine saying that when she's stuck into writing a novel, she just can't read anybody else. She will beforehand because she loves reading, but during the actual process, she has to put her books down and not read other people.
I'm sure. Yeah, I've heard that from authors as well. But in the last 4 or 5 years, for a few reasons, it prompted me into try and work hard at being able to manage this. So now I don't have that, and I'm able to listen to a bit more music. But I think my relationship with music is a little bit different now when I'm listening. Perhaps I get through more, but I get through it less rigorously. But maybe when I was in love, when I had love affairs with people's music, but for me that was a little bit closer to the experience of being a learning jazz musician, because we always talk about internalizing music, and we might listen to a same solo over and over again in order to internalize that language, which is still a really important process for me. And I'm doing that probably, that I have that relationship with kind of oral tradition musics at the moment.
Brilliant.
I want that sensuality that they have.
Well, we're going to come back to all of this. I'm going to open the floor now for Ralph, because I'm sure that he shares a lot of that sort of common ground that you've just talked about. And you've brought a wonderful piece for us to listen to. So, Ralph, might you introduce your piece?
Yeah, the slightly longer one or the very short one?
The first piece that you told us about when we had a little conversation before.
Scarborough Fair?
No, I thought there was another piece from your own album.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so this is a little snippet, only 40 or 50 seconds of a piece of mine. It's called Cryptogram, and so it is a cryptogram. So I've taken some numbers and turned them into notes, and then made it into a piece. It started off as an exercise in trying to give the musicians a very small amount of written musical material and then make a whole piece out of it. So it's like an A4 side of paper, but it turns into an 8 or 9 minute piece on the album.
So if we can evoke either orally or sort of in our mind's eye visually, what is it that's on that A4 page that the musicians have got?
They've got effectively a melody. It looks like a melody, so they've got the rhythm and they've got the notes, but then throughout the piece we sometimes just use the rhythm, we sometimes just use the notes, we sometimes use all the notes at once, that kind of thing.
And that decision making about what you're then suddenly going to do, was any of it choreographed and sort of predetermined, or is it because of the nature of the band used to playing together, having that trust and that sort of like a shoal of fish, or
a mixture of both really? It kind of to start with, we sort of started choreographing it and working some things out, and then it took on a life of its own and became the piece. And now it's fairly, since then when we've played it, it's become fairly settled. But at first it was very much different things every time.
So how much conversation before we hear the recording? So you went in the studio, and this snippet we're going to hear is you in the studio recording it. How much of it did you revisit, sort of determining what you were going to do, or by the time you went into the studio, would you all just relax and it become sort of second nature, and then sort of throwing collective caution to the wind and letting it be without pre-discussion, or do you still touch base before you play it and remind each other?
We probably don't touch base, and we probably didn't in the studio. We rehearsed it quite a lot, but then part of what I was thinking about when I chose the musicians for the band is I wanted musicians that, although I know that they could play the music exactly how I wrote it and they would put in the effort and learn it like that, I know that then when it comes to a performance situation, they're just going to do what they think feels right, and what they however the mood takes them is what will happen.
I think Alex, you'll agree that's a lovely position to be in as a player, isn't it? That you can collectively determine what's going to happen. So I don't know, what's a cryptogram?
So a cryptogram is just like a code, basically.
Great. Wow. Well, let's hear it. Over to you, Nick. Fantastic. So when was that recorded and who were the people there that were performing?
So it was recorded, must have been the beginning of 2016, around this time of year, 2016. So you saw there me, obviously, Misha Muller-Bardo on double bass, Scott Chapman on the drums, Sam Rapley on clarinet, Cecilia Bignell on cello, and James Copus on trumpet.
Brilliant. So both of you got another thing in common, which is while doing NYJC, you both then went on to study at the Royal Academy of Music. I'm wondering, Alex, first of all, if you might talk about studying at the Academy and then what you've done since in a sort of a snapshot of your career so far.
Well, I studied for 2 years at the Academy on the jazz course, and then I re-auditioned and studied another 3 years on the composition course. I think because I was just, I didn't have exposure to kind of new music and other types of art music until I got to the Academy. So it wasn't that I was disenfranchised with jazz, if that's the right phrase, but I was yearning for something somewhere else. And then I did a postgrad at the Royal College of Music studying composition.
Oh, great.
And I actually stopped playing the trombone for 4 or 5 years because I just felt there was an urgency. There was so much that I wanted to do in composing that such was my urgency. I wanted to spend all day composing and none of the day practicing the trombone, which I now love doing and have often loved doing. And then I've been working as a composer and educator, and I writing concert music probably. I did a little bit dabbling in more commercial musics, but I think I'm not wired up for it. But I did learn a lot being an orchestrator in some commercial settings,
Yeah.
Which is partly also the answer from what you said earlier about the orchestral piece. So when I finished doing that for a few years, I felt I was desperate to write for orchestra, and I've actually had a few opportunities to write for orchestra through kind of young composery schemes or some commissions or something. So I've written quite a lot for large ensembles, and I think because in kind of art music composing, we often talk about ourselves like having a voice, like jazz musicians do as well. And I kind of found a voice for myself as a composer writing for big ensembles because I was kind of lucky enough to happen across these opportunities. And then and also in kind of operas as well. I started by writing for operas and orchestras, these really big, expensive things with tons and tons of cultural baggage. And I've at the moment I'm trying to write smaller and smaller and smaller to make something, to make things a bit more lean and to concentrate on certain things. And I wrote the most exciting thing. One of the most exciting things I did was last year, just before the world ended in March. I wrote a piece for Ensemble Modern, which are this big contemporary music ensemble. I'm sure you know them. I'm just explaining in case.
I was going to say, did you go to Frankfurt? Did you actually go over to Frankfurt to work with them?
Yeah, it was wonderful. I was so grateful for this opportunity because they were musicians who are really intensely amazing, and also I feel they really want a good play, the instrumentalists in that ensemble. And I feel that that's my ideal musician that I want to write, especially in notated music, is musicians that want to have a really good play. And I wrote a half-hour piece for them that I played with it. That was one of the most exciting things I've done. And I'm also really interested in recording. So in the last few years, I've been concentrating on getting some recordings. And I've made a couple of albums, one of which is coming out on Birmingham Record Company and NMC, which is one of my attempts to scale down those large ensemble voice things into something that was smaller. and works with drums, guitar, classical saxophone, so you can write the sausages out of it. Myself as an improvising musician and electronics. The last few years as well, I've been exploring a lot of electronic music, which I was a bit technophobic when I was introduced to these things at college, but I kind of found a way in through really cheap MIDI synthesizer sounds. There's an album by Frank Zappa called Jazz from Hell, which isn't really very jazzy at all, but there's a track on that called G-Spot Tornado, which is wonderful. I don't like the name of the track, but the track is good. And this was a nice way in, and other kind of like really dirty, cheap synthesizers. So now I kind of have a world that I'm writing for that's acoustic instruments and what I call infinite MIDI synthesizers, which is fun to kind of use those Nan Caro things that he wrote for player pianos, which are impossible to play, but translate that into the MIDI world. Like there's a phenomenon on the internet called Black MIDI, which is where you make kind of these video game-esque tunes with so much MIDI information that the computer explodes. And also there's a composer who's writing much more serious music called Roykova. I've forgotten her other name, and she quantizes this massive amount of like shares and data analysis into MIDI musical signals. And I love the power. I love the power that MIDI can give our acoustic music, but I also like the kind of real organicness of acoustic music, especially improvising, and the fragility and the nuance of an all organic being. That's maybe a summary of whatever the question was that you've asked.
Well, I'm going to go over to Ralph in 2 seconds. I just want to add a couple of things. First of all, there's a correlation between Ensemble Modern and Frank Zappa because of the Yellow Sharks. So that's really nice, the Yellow Sharks album, which I think it was one of the last projects he did before he passed away. And it's fantastic if people haven't heard it. And that was the Ensemble Modern with Frank Zappa.
Yeah, I like that album very much.
Great. And the other thing about the Ensemble Modern is a lot of the players have got perfect pitch, but because they come from countries that have got different tunings for A, it's there's often a stress of what is perfect pitch, what is the perfect A, which I love. I didn't know that. That just fills me with like, yeah, bring on more. And then also when you're talking about your sort of background, it's very similar so I went to Goldsmiths and studied composition. I played oboe. I fell out of love with the oboe, but couldn't believe my luck when I got to Goldsmiths. Could go to Senate House Library, got fantastic, and I just gorged scores and recordings. And any free tickets, we were very lucky at that time. We used to get loads of free tickets to go to. I was, all I had to do was pay for my train fare or whatever to get there as a student, and saw Dollar Stargaz Licht at the Royal Opera House, and again, it's like the magic of the acoustic sound, and then bringing that into my own writing, and then fell in love with playing and realised it was necessary to improvise and to play as well. So I took up the baritone saxophone, and that's the sort of thing. But also what you're saying, and I think Ralph will resonate with this as well. I've recently been given a very beautiful book about Henry Moore, the sculptor, and it was actually made in the 1970s when it was his 80th birthday, and the photographer is a really close friend of the family, so she gave it to me recently for my birthday, and I was reading it, and he was talking about sculpting, why it's important to him. And he said because he has to have 3 dimensions, and he has to have 3 dimensions. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. Because the transition of light and how it impacts on his sculpture during the day is a really important element to his art. And I thought, you've just captured exactly why orchestration is such an important element to my music. I can't write for a saxophone. I can't write for a quartet with a rhythm section. I mean, I do, but I get the maximum orchestration even out of those 4 instruments. And but for me, it's all about getting a large ensemble together and integrating it. Just like, those is a really important component. And Ralph, you said that you played with the National Youth Orchestra, and I know from your own writing, so might you share with us, and then we'll actually start to talk about the vibraphone a bit as well, the wealth of colour that's really important to you as a player and a performer and a composer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I kind of, when I was growing up, I was jointly doing classical percussion and added on jazz a little bit later. And so I kind of have a lot of influence in what I do from a lot of classical repertoire, and being a percussionist, a lot of that is kind of 20th century stuff. So people like Steve Reich and his music for percussion, things like Nogoi marimbas and the percussion quartet and those sorts of things have had a big influence in what I do. And then also just what you were talking about there was really interesting, because so a project I've done was I was looking at the art of Paul Klee, the Swiss German artist, who was a musician as well, a violinist, and something that he wrote about and thought about a lot was how the relationship between art and music, and how music has the amazing quality that it happens through time. So an audience member is being directed over a period of time as to what to experience by the composer or the performer. They have that kind of power. And so in a 10-minute piece, there's 10 minutes of this journey. Whereas when you, obviously as a visual artist, you produce a piece, and the way a person experiences it is largely up to them in terms of how they see it. They might be looking at this bit, or they might be looking at this bit. And so he was thinking about, well, how can I kind of take that passage of time that happens in music, and how can I kind of direct the viewers of my art in what they're looking at in my work, and kind of give them the same experience. And so I did a project where I took his paintings and then kind of reimagined them and tried to think, well, how can I kind of make this musical and put that element of time back into it? What can I do to kind of recreate that experience?
And it really relates to, there are lots of lovely coincidences in these conversations, or is it happenstance? Depends what you believe in. But the blanket that you've got behind you, Alex, is very Paul Klee.
Yes.
Yeah, well, he's a friend of mine, and he just had some offcuts. It actually reflects the personalities of the people I'm speaking to.
Oh, brilliant. So, well, I'm a big fan of Paul Klee as well, and he actually talks about synesthesia quite a lot, I think, in his writings and his books as well, which we can talk about another time. But that just basically, for the people watching who don't know what synesthesia is, it's where all your senses are interconnected. So, you might hear a sound that also evokes a smell and a taste. And with me, I see physical movement, and I hear phonetic sound as well. When I hear a musical line, I actually hear it represented phonetically as well. So yeah, all the senses, and it's why I get goosebumps a lot as well, things people say. So might you, from your perspective, Ralph, the vibraphone is a very unusual instrument to a lot of people, in that they don't really often have the opportunity to work with the vibraphone, and that it brings such magic. So I was wondering whether you might actually share with us a bit of an insight into the instrument, and then we're going to invite Eva to come and talk to us after that, because I know she's been listening to what we've been talking about, and I know she's dying to ask lots of questions. So Ralph, and obviously Alex, any questions that you've got after Ralph's shared about the vibraphone, dive in as well. So Ralph, tell us about the vibraphone.
Yeah, okay, well, I find it really cool that it's quite a relatively modern instrument. So it was invented in the 1920s, kind of developed from xylophones and marimbas, which had been around for much longer. And the innovations that made it a new instrument and allowed it to stand the test of time were adding a sustain pedal. So prior to the vibraphone, there were metallophones and like the glockenspiel, for example, but they were limited in what they can do, in that you had no control over how long the notes were going to last. And so when they invented the vibraphone, they introduced a sustain pedal, which works very much like the piano pedal. So you push it down to release the notes, and you get long notes, but then you can lift the pedal and you've got that control. And so modern vibraphonists will use the pedal in kind of a very expressive way. So it's not just on or off, but there's all sorts of kind of in between levels. So you get slightly longer notes, slightly shorter notes. You use it for muffling or for accenting notes. And then the other thing that made it the vibraphone was the addition of a motor. So the vibraphone has got the notes on the top, which you strike to create the sound. They vibrate. And underneath, you can't see here because of the angle of my camera, but there's a series of tubes which are resonators. So they're tuned to the note so that the standing wave from the note bounces around in the tube. And so they introduced a fan with an electric motor. I'm just plugging mine in. And so it introduces what is actually a tremolo effect, although the people originally marketing the vibraphone miscorrectly identified it as a vibrato effect, which is how it got the name. So that's where the vibraphone comes from, and obviously I'm playing it with 4 mallets, which was an innovation kind of in the 40s and 50s. People like Gary Burton was really who took the vibraphone into new sort of technical territories. But even as early as Lionel Hampton, people were playing with 4 mallets to get chords. So I can play like this, or I can use the mallets independently to kind of make textures, or I can play just with 2 mallets in a kind of a scalic way, like that. Is he?
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that people don't realise is the balance acoustically of the vibes, because it's already amplified by the fact you're using 2 microphones, and I think sometimes people don't appreciate that. What advice would you give about miking up the vibes when you're doing a live gig? Do you ever manage to play just purely acoustically, or is it usually that it's helpful to have some amplification?
Yeah, I think so. When I first started gigging, I was very worried about that, and I was taking microphones and amplifiers and things everywhere. And then more recently, it depends on the gig, but a lot of the time I'm playing acoustically, because I feel that the brilliance of the sound is easily lost with amplification of the vibraphone, and I hope that the kind of musicians I'm playing with are the kind of musicians who would realise that the vibraphone is quieter, and the whole band would change a bit, and people are listening, and I think that's usually the case. People are really sympathetic and are listening a lot. That being said, in a big room, I do use microphones. So getting technical about it, I like to use 2 condenser microphones like this over the vibraphone, because there's a lot of higher frequencies that you want to capture, and then sometimes another microphone underneath, usually just a dynamic, that's going to get lots of volume out of the instrument.
Do you happen to have a bow to hand?
I do, yeah. So as well as playing with mallets, you can also bow the vibraphone. I mean, I say I have a bow. What I actually have is a pair of
Brilliant!
coat hangers.
Look at that. That's fantastic.
With horsehair on them. So you can bow the notes. You can also even bend the notes with mallets and a bow as well. So I play quite a lot like that. You'll hear in the one of the other tracks later on. I'm doing some bowing.
And the other thing that I've noticed when I work with vibes players and marimba players, but vibes players, is where the same with when I work with a Rhodes player, that people realise that you can't play pianistically on a Fender Rhodes because it just can't take the volume of notes. The best best players I know are very minimal, so almost 4 notes rather than the full Monty that they might do on the piano. And so I think, what advice would you give to somebody that's doing comping that's using 4 notes, because it's transferable skills? What do you go for when you're comping?
Well, I'm always thinking really carefully about what notes. If you've only got 4 notes, obviously you've got to be really selective with what you're going for. So something I practiced a lot when I was first working really hard on my comping was just playing thirds and sevenths in the left hand all the time. So then whatever else you add over the top, if you're playing other extensions in your right hand, you know that you've got the heart of the chord kind of covered. And then I would say the main thing is to try and think melodically in your comping. So it doesn't matter so much even what's going on underneath the top voicing, but if your top voicing is just leaping around because you know your voicings and you're just playing, it's just kind of jumping around, it's never going to sound very musical. But if you can create a melody with your top line, then you can kind of be much more expressive with it. And
so if someone was coming from it from a classical perspective, I think to start with Bach, the cello suites, and also some of the the keyboard music that's doing that thing, because it hasn't got the sustain. The piano, the keyboard didn't have the same sustain. So how, like you say, how to be sort of almost ambidextrous so that you're getting through all the changes more melodically than you are chordally. Brilliant. Yeah. So what I'd like to do, if I may, is bring one of your dear friends from the summer school, because you have now gone on to become a member of our faculty, and you've done some regional work. You've done the short course, and you came to work with us on the summer school this year when we were online. And we've invited one of your band members, who I know is dying to ask both of you questions. So Eva, come and join us, Eva Fiddler. Hello, nice to see you.
Hi, good to see you, yeah.
So just as we introduce you to everybody, to contextualise where you are now on your creative journey. So you came to do NYJC Summer School this year, and we were online, but I think we still had a really productive time, and you were with Ralph. Which year are you in, and what are your sort of aspirations long term, and what instrument do you play as well?
So so I did the online course last year, and then the year before that I did the short course as well in person, which was great. And so I'm in year 11. My name's Eva, as you've said, and my main instrument is the tenor saxophone. So I had a great time on the summer school, and I think it was really well done, even though it was online. But it was great, and I'm planning to audition this year as well.
Great. I'm really looking forward to hearing you in the audition, and we will get to Repton. We will, last week of August. I've got positive feelings about that. Next year is our 15th birthday, just to let the three of you in on a secret. It's our 15th birthday next year, and we were going to this year focus on third stream, but we're actually postponing it to next year because bringing people together. And third stream music is sort of bringing together this crossover of different genres, being genre fluid. There's a really nice word that you used, Alex, as well about not being sort of tied down to a genre earlier on. Polystylism. Yeah.
Something like that.
I was trying to work out who she was when you started. And then I see what you mean. So Eva, take it away with some questions, and feel free to ask if you've got questions that have come out of what they've been talking about now, and it's not the ones that you emailed me. You've got free reign, so maybe, and direct it to whichever, whether it's both or one at a time. Over to you.
Great. So my first question is, I guess, a question for both of you, and it's just, what are your sort of positive things to have come out of lockdown and sort of in lockdown and just quarantine? How did you kind of overcome a lot of the anti-productionness?
Alex, first of all.
Oh my goodness, I'm not sure how to answer that in a positive way. But I did have some problem. A part of me is I like working. You know what? It was like one of those dreams. One of those old. There's a children's story called The Five Children and It, when they make a wish on a fairy, and the fairy made their wish come true, but it was always bad somehow. Like when money came, it was drowning them in money, and it was kind of like that. Sometimes I wish everyone would leave me alone and I could just write music. But then it came and it was like this and it was bad. And I learned that actually I really like people. And I had a playing injury because I think I stopped. I carried on practicing lots, but I didn't do any exercise and I injured myself. And I couldn't play or write music for a couple of months then, which was a bit of a head splurge. But I think it was good because I have to. And now I know how to look after my body. And I've learned lots about myself, and I've mainly kept writing, but I probably haven't done as much writing. I've done more practicing probably than I would have, because the trombone is kind of a creative output of the body. I lived a lot of time on my own as well in lockdown, and the trombone, it's so immediate to practice, because often with composing, it's not like painting or play or improvising. It takes a long time to get that feedback, that sensation of I've made this. But with the trombone, it's instant out the other end of the instrument. So I was drawn towards that a little bit. But I've had pockets of productivity as a writer as well, but nothing so much to boast about, I think. Oh, but I have listened to much more music. I've got into much better listening habits than I was in, so I'm really pleased about that. And I've sometimes before lockdown, I was very snobby about kind of the academia side of everything, but I have gone into a few little musicological books which I found helpful. I've been reading a lot of somebody called George Lewis, who's a really important improvising musician, trombonist, composer, and academic. And he's just full of amazing things. And not so much, he's a little bit left field, so not so much in a mainstream jazz trombonist education, and well worth checking out for any musician. He really does transcend the instrument. So that's my positive.
Mm-hmm. Ralph. Thank you very much, Alex. Ralph.
Yeah, so I think interesting to hear Alex talking about how long it takes for feedback when you're composing, and I've certainly found that I've kind of had ambitions of writing music for new groups and things over lockdown, and found that the fact that I'm not going to be able to hear this music for a while, and I can't write for groups and then just immediately get it played like I might normally be able to, has been kind of a stumbling block. But what I have been able to do is, which is great, is focus on the duo I have with Cecilia, who's my wife, and she's a cellist, and does kind of electronics and composition as well. So that was really nice, because it's something that, because we live together and we want to play music together, it's sometimes so convenient that we don't actually do it, if you see what I mean, because there's so much going on, and we've both got other projects and gigs and all sorts of things. So it didn't happen very often. And then suddenly we got into lockdown. It's like, well, who else am I going to play music with? We finally got to have some rehearsals and write some music, and which has been great, because we've really sort of found a voice as an ensemble. And we've also sort of started to get to grips with some more technology stuff, and recording and editing and that kind of thing. So that's been really nice.
Leads nicely into, I think it would be lovely for Eva to, and everybody watching, to actually hear you brought an extract of the duo. So before Eva, we carry on with more questions, shall we have a listen to, because it fits in nicely with what Ralph was just saying. Should we have a listen to Ralph's piece? Might you explain what it is and introduce it, and then Nick will play it to us all?
Yeah. So this is so the duo is called Imprint, cello and percussion, and this is our version of Scarborough Fair, which is, so it comes from Cecilia's arrangement, and we've adapted it for the duo, so it uses the melody that everybody knows, and then it's got some areas of improvisation, and it's got lots of extended techniques and some weird sounds. And yeah.
Great. Over to you, Nick. Beautiful. So what I'm going to suggest is that if it's okay with you, Ralph, it'd be lovely to either put a link on the website or to sort of share it on our YouTube channel. I'm wondering, both of you, have you got YouTube channels? Eva, come and join us, lovely. Ralph and Alex, have you got places that people can go to hear your music? Ralph, have you got, where's yours?
The easiest place to go is just to my website, because that kind of links everywhere, just
Right.
ralphwyld.com.
Beautiful. And Alex?
The easiest place to go is my website, but also on SoundCloud I have a lot of the recordings up there, and bits and bobs on Spotify,
Right.
Bandcamp and stuff.
So Eva, back to you, lovely. What did you make of that?
Yeah, no, I loved it. I really liked the kind of merging of the two instruments, because I feel like those two aren't things that you hear necessarily together, especially because, I mean, for me, like cello and kind of strings like that, I have are like synonymous with classical music only, so it was cool to like hear it in sort of, you know, conversation with the vibes. And yeah, what you were saying about getting into recording as well, I thought that was really interesting, because that's something I've been interested in lockdown as well. So yeah, I really liked it.
Oh, great. And it's interesting what you say about that, something being synonymous to jazz, because from my perspective, and I've always been fascinated by the fact that we get mainly trumpet, saxophone, trombone, rhythm section players, singers. But from a practical, you know, from a composer's perspective, I'm working with so many different instruments all the time. So it's interesting that there is that sort of synergy that you feel is there between. So we are next year, when we do the sort of third stream side of things in our 15th birthday, I think that's a real opportunity for us to make it a bit more obvious with everybody that, you know, the music isn't exclusively for those instruments, and especially people like ourselves who have got such a love of orchestration. I think we're the best people to champion that, definitely. So have you got more questions for, maybe if we start with Ralph this time?
Yes, I have. So I guess this was sort of my next question, was sort of a question for Alex, but I guess Ralph, you can answer it too if you want. So a lot of jazz musicians and kind of musicians in general who I've spoken to kind of say that they think tone is the most important thing for a musician, and I was just wondering on sort of your thoughts on that and whether you agree, and like why you think so many musicians like believe in the importance of and the development of tone.
Yeah, wow, what a great question. It's interesting to answer this as a vibraphone player, I think, because there's a certain amount of the vibraphone just kind of has a sound, which is not, in some ways, not at all true, but at the same time, it's not quite the same as a saxophone player's tone or a trumpet player's tone, maybe, where there's kind of, so with the embouchure and all that kind of thing, there's so many millions of factors at play. But I would say I understand why people think it's very important, and it's an amazing thing to practice and kind of dig into, because to a large extent, it's kind of what people hear as your voice, and someone with a beautiful tone is going to be, you're going to want to, you're going to want to listen to them. You want to hear what they have to say. But at the same time, I don't know about it being the most important thing. I don't want to upset anyone who has really strong views. But for me, I always feel the most important thing is rhythm. I guess I would say that as a percussionist, but I feel like rhythm is the thing that gets taken for granted a lot of the time. And it's, especially in a rhythmic music like jazz, it really makes or breaks it. And then a lot of the time we end up, not at NYJC because we're very enlightened, but a lot of people end up talking a lot about harmony and melody and learning licks and learning language. And what they forget to think about is actually, like, rhythm is at least half of what we do, if not more. And so for me, that's where we should really be starting.
Brilliant answer. Alex?
It's really interesting question, and makes me think about things that are really useful to think about. And I have heard people say things like this before, and I suppose a little bit of me feels it's coming from what, especially with young jazz musicians or young instrumentalists, what makes your playing most convincing the quickest. So for a young player to sound convincing and really mature, perhaps that seems to be the kind of place it's coming from. But I probably wouldn't, and I would agree with that, in that when there's so many players and you think, and you just hear, especially with horn players and stuff, because the tone is so personal, you hear their tone and you think, oh, it doesn't matter what they're going to play in any other musical parameter, because the tone is so convincing that this is so much to say, this note. But I probably wouldn't subscribe to any musical parameter being more or less important than another, because there are so many diverse ways of making music in the world, and every kind of musical stylistic language has its own set of values, perhaps, or but it's an interesting thing to think about, definitely, for sure. And certainly in lots of different types of music, Western musical education, we do seem to be quite pitch and rhythm orientated, and perhaps there's something to be said about the holistic nature of tone and timbre that might be a really important element in lots of shamanistic music or spiritual music, and things like that.
Can't unmute. There we go. Couldn't get it to mute. Also, to add things like, obviously Dexter Gordon, Lester Young, Coleman Hawkins, very obvious. You can hear them within a matter of seconds. You can tell who it is that playing, because they have got their own sound. Coltrane, from the saxophonist perspective, but they were chasing their own sound. So I think to follow in their wake and to see what sort of sound it is you want to create for yourself, and invest the time in slowly finding that sound, rather than feeling that you've got to, these different people sound like this, so you've now got to find another sound is what is it, which of those sounds and elements of other people's playing really moves you, you know, and that's the sound world you want to invest in. So it's still being authentic in who you are. And I think the parameters are interesting between the difference between the vibraphone and the saxophone, you know. It's two totally different possibilities, isn't it? Like Ralph was saying. So, but sound. The reason I'm really pleased that you asked this question is because sound is really important to composers as well. You know, even if we're not actually physically playing the instrument, it's such an important element of our writing, and it's in our hearing. I remember once when I did my first thing with Sibelius. It was a big orchestra for double orchestra, and I remember standing on the platform at the station, and suddenly in my inner ear I was no longer hearing orchestral sound. I was hearing these Mickey Mouse MIDI, and it was like a sudden cartoon moment. I had to sort of shake it all out just to remind myself that no, I've invested all this time to get authentic acoustic sound in my inner ear. And you know, sound is important to all of us, and it moves us. But I would do it for the right reasons. Do it for your reasons. It's your sound. Over to you again, Eva.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks so much, everyone. So just and then kind of building on what Issie was saying, especially with composition, you know, I was saying earlier that I have been getting into composition in lockdown, but one thing I found that I did a lot is that like I would have an initial idea and then I'd be like, oh, like I really like this, and then I'd kind of develop it into something, and then I would find it really hard to sort of take it further than that. So I just ended up with like hundreds of kind of, you know, 15-second ideas like sung on my voice memos, and then a lot of the things I just didn't really take forward from that, sadly. So yeah, what's your advice on sort of that kind of side of composition and just like developing your ideas that you have?
Before Ralph or Alex answer that, can I just ask you, how much do you look at other people's other compositions and see what element, because often it's a small amount of actual material that's been then developed, and so do you ever analyze other people's pieces to see what techniques they used, what you would identify as the real theme and the most, you know, the content, the ingredients?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I could be doing that a lot more, but I like doing production stuff as well. So a lot of the time I try to like recreate things like that. But you know, often I do find that I guess I'm sort of biased to all of like my favorite kind of musicians. Like a lot of my work then sounds similar to like the last piece that I've done. But yeah, no, I will take that into consideration. And
I'll hand over the thing to in a few weeks' time. Sound and Music, where 6 of NYJC go. We work for a week for the Sound and Music Summer School, where we work with composers and we look at that, exactly that. How do you get the maximum out of the minimum? And so, but anyway, come and join us on that summer school and see what Judith Robinson, who runs the summer school, is going to be with us on one of the Wednesday evenings as well. So, but I'm going to hand over to Ralph and then Alex. What would you say in response to Eva's question?
Well, I would say, firstly, you're not alone in that experience. My computer and my manuscript books and things are just like littered with ideas that when I first came up with them, I thought they were amazing and they were going to be brilliant. And then I started developing them and they just kind of didn't really go anywhere. And whatever it was that made me like them in the first place kind of got lost somehow. So I wish I had an answer to solve that problem, and I don't, but I can tell you what I'm doing to try and get around that exact problem. Firstly, I would encourage you to make sure you keep all those scraps of things that you don't like, or you've kind of hit a wall with, because a lot of the time you'll come across them in a year's time, and whatever it was that attracted you to them in the first place will be back, and you'll suddenly find that, oh wait, I know where this is going now. I know what's coming next, and I can do something with this. I would also say try to. Sometimes the best thing is just to power through with these things. So you hit a wall. You're working on something. You hit a wall and it doesn't work. Just try not to get bogged down in making decisions. And is this the right thing? Should I go to this chord? Should I do this? Should it go back to the bridge? Just try to think, I'm just gonna make a decision. I'm just gonna keep going, and I'll do this. and just start making some snap decisions, because sometimes what you need to do is get to the end and have a sense of the overall piece itself, and then you can look back and think, oh no, obviously it just shouldn't go back to the bridge there, this needs to be this bit, or it's something that we talked about a lot when so I was at Academy and I was studying composition. Pete Churchill is the composition teacher on the jazz course, and it's something he talks about when you're kind of in the class with him and watching him go through the process. Everything just kind of happens, the music just tumbles out and decisions are made, and you can definitely spend too much time thinking about these things when actually your musical instinct and your intuition might be the best thing. Just go with it and see what happens.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Alex, thank you. That's brilliant, Ralph. Alex.
Thanks, Ralph. I definitely agree with everything Ralph was saying about flow and powering through. And then at the end, when your instinct is really important. And sometimes it can feel, especially when you study composition, because the easiest thing in composition to teach is when everything makes sense. And if you're going to write your composition book, the easiest thing to write a composition book on is stuff that makes sense. But actually, it doesn't have to make sense, and you can just do something because you feel it. I wrote down some things because it's the composition teacher within me, right? So the first thing I wrote was when you said at the end it was the same as your last piece, the little comment you said, and I wanted to say that's fine. And if you're writing the same piece again and again for 5 years, that's great. Lots of composers do that, and it sounds great, and it's kind of like you intensify the intelligence of what you're saying. And some composers don't write lots of different music. Some of the most exciting composers write a tiny stylistic thing with hardly any language at all. It's like a jazz musician only playing one scale or one lick or something, but it's still, imagine condensing your intelligence into that space. It's fantastic. And then sometimes also what is fine is when you're looking at other composers of how they've done music, and if your music sounds the same as some other composers, and sometimes people derogatorily call that when music is being derivative, but actually that's fine too. That's great, and it's a very well-known way to learn, and that's really important. And then with this thing of having some material that you start and taking it somewhere, I think there's two ways I might suggest, and you get to choose whichever feels great for you. And one is maybe what Issie was really usefully saying, and thinking about, saying the maximum with the minimum amount of material, or the textbook example of this is it Mozart Symphony 40 that goes da 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 da. Everyone had it on the ringtones in the 90s. It was so hip. But it's a small musical motif, and you can explore how to develop techniques to make this musical material last a whole piece. But another way in is to say, well, don't do that. It seems quite exciting to me that you say you've got loads of these bits of material and you don't really know how to develop them, perhaps, so don't develop them. And then you say you were working on a DAW, a digital audio workstation. You said you were doing producing. So perhaps take it in from that technique and play around with things on the DAW. It's really easy to cut things up. It's really easy to copy and paste things, make these enormous structures that would never occur to people who just write on manuscript paper, because it's too much effort. And but some manuscript paper has a flip side, because some things on manuscript paper are really easy to do. On a DAW it's tricky. So possibly a way in to do that. It could be kind of exciting, I'm imagining, to have loads of these bits of material all in the same piece that never develop, but they somehow are placed in meaningful ways. I think that would be exciting.
So everything that Alex and Ralph have said, I think, to summarise, completely support everything and endorse everything they say. And it's great to have this conversation, because it's a conversation that all of us have had from different perspectives many times over, whether it's us as composers, us as students, us as teachers. But I don't know, it's lovely with the analogy of the visual arts, because some of what you're doing is when they have sketchbooks and they just obsessively focus on something. So when they're going to finish the bigger picture, sometimes my great grandfather was a very prolific artist in Switzerland, and there were like 8 sketchbooks, and he's just on several pages drawing the eye from different perspectives because he wants to perfect the eye. And it's like what you're doing is part of that thing. The way that you're writing and getting slightly stuck is because you're focusing in on the detail of that that motivic idea. So see sometimes those exercises as exactly that, exercises. You know, when people are practicing classical music and you're walking through school or a junior conservatoire or the conservatoire itself, and you hear a violinist practicing studies, and that what you're doing there is it's a study of the composition. So it doesn't always have to be a fully fledged piece. That study and that sketchbook is a really important part of your process. And then, as Alex says, it's one of the lovely things about the digital age is that you can actually cut and paste and just try things out and see what a transition is going to sound like going to a different key. You know, if it suddenly goes up a minor third, or if you condense it, if you make it more condense it basically by sort of taking out a few of the notes and making the time span of it become more intense. That's much easier on the computer. You can start to hear that technique in people's writings in finished products as well. So again, it's part of the study, it's part of the technique. And then writing pieces is painful and it is difficult because it's like you're chiseling it out, and you get used to that process and it speeds up. Everything that you're doing, even those pieces that you don't use, those little bits that you don't use, is contributing. You've been talking a lot about the past piece, you know, my piece is sounding like the previous piece, but also every little bit that you're working out is informing your inner musician so that you will grow on that, and your future pieces are going to benefit from that as well. So it's really exciting process, and just like everyone's saying, go with it. And what Ralph was saying, that especially at this stage, you'll come back to things, keep them, you'll come back to things, and the next chapter, you know, some pieces I've written have just written themselves in like no time at all. I think this is Ralph and Alex, I'm sure, will relate to this. Other pieces I've had to really work and work. I just can't seem to get it to quite. So there is no sort of expected time span of how long it's going to take you to write a piece of music. Each piece it really is like you're starting afresh, but actually you are building on a lot. And the musicianship that you're developing as a player is also informing you as a writer. So there we go. That's marvelous. Actually, we haven't talked about composition yet on these sessions, and I've loved every single minute of it. Nick, come and join us. And so,
what a fantastic evening.
Fellow player and composer, how was that then?
Really, really so lovely to sit in and listen in, and just echoing what everyone's saying, and just thought-provoking as well. I've been making notes too here, thinking that's a really good way of approaching that or thinking about that. So thanks, everybody.
Isn't it great seeing Eva again after summer school and giving her the opportunity to ask all these amazing questions?
Yes, we did joke earlier, just before, as we were setting up, it's Eva's turn to give Ralph the grilling this time rather than Ralph giving her the grilling.
Brilliant. And then it's been absolutely joyous to have the space and the time to talk to both of you. Alex, it's been lovely to reconnect. We'll say goodbye in a moment because we're going to listen to one of your pieces, but you know, we've not really seen each other since 2007. We ran into each other at the South Bank when we went to see Donna Stargow's Licht, and it was lovely to have that snatched, but we definitely will be talking next year. We had a snatched conversation. We'll have definitely be talking between now and next year. In fact, I'll be getting in touch with you in 2 weeks' time because I've got something happening that's going to start to unfold towards the 15th birthday, and Ralph and I have already touched base on that. It's been really great, Ralph, to talk to you and have that opportunity. Whenever we talk, it's always about the music we're going to teach, so to actually start to talk about our own experiences and our own voices has been marvelous. And again, Ralph, we've already started to talk about the 15th birthday, so that that conversation is going to continue. So if you're going to have a 15th birthday, Nick, and especially with COVID and all the sort of bursaries, and we've even got some ideas where we'd like to commission some new work. So that's going to take a little bit of funding, isn't it? So tell us, how might people that are watching be able to contribute to really making that 15th birthday special?
Absolutely. So if you would like to support NYJC in its commitment to making our work accessible to all young musicians, no matter what the financial background, please visit nationalyouthjazz.co.uk/donate.
And we've got loads of things planned for the calendar year, and then heading into our 15th birthday. We've got a very exciting day on Friday. Tell us quickly, what is it that you're going to be doing? And obviously the working title isn't the working title we're going to use for the project, but if you want to share with everybody what you're going to be beavering away, planning, and then contacting people about?
Yes, so we've got a development date on Friday looking at how we can make these National Youth Jazz Wednesday sessions, kind of integrating them more with live performances or pre-recorded performances. So we're looking at kind of what we first and foremost need to do to make that happen. So it's very exciting, actually, that we're going to be getting the young musicians involved again, bringing music to these sessions.
So it's an open call, and anyone that follows us, anyone that takes part in us, we'd like to invite them. So how are people going to hear about that in the coming weeks? Because there's actually a really good way of finding out what these questions and invitations are. What would you suggest people sign up for?
Yes, there's a good way indeed. So if you'd like to be more involved in NYJC's activities, as a young musician, a music leader, practitioner, or audience member, you can sign up for NYJC's newsletter, which comes to you every couple of months. And to do that, you just need to visit nationalyouthjazz.co.uk/sign up.
And also on the website, we've got a lovely page. So the website, www.nationalyouthjazz.co.uk. Sorry, I got a slight speech impediment. I got a bit tongue-tied there. But we've got a lovely page about alumni as well, people that have been with NYJC. I know Alex and Ralph, you're both on that page and you've submitted some fantastic information. So do go and take a read, and we're populating that more and more. In 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be talking to more ambassadors, alumni rather, really getting them to engage. So we're building that page, which is very exciting, again, towards our 15th birthday. And finally, Eva, how does it feel to be talking to Ralph and Alex? I think it feels to me like we've had a conversation of 4 musicians online. It doesn't feel like a student tutor relationship.
Yeah, no, it's been fantastic. Everything you guys have said has been really useful. And, you know, as Nick was saying, Ralph, it's been great to grill you, get you back for that last summer. But no, yeah, it's just great to have some like different perspectives. And, you know, Ralph, especially because you're a rhythm section player, I feel like I'm like a lot of the time focusing on frontline players. So it's been cool to get that perspective as well. Obviously, Alex, you've been great. So yeah, just it's been awesome. Thanks, guys.
From Alex's perspective, it's the sound world as well. Reminding you don't have to stay in the quartet of rhythm section, frontline or quintet, that there's a whole sound world that we can take our music and improvisation into. And Ralph and Alex, as we sign off, what have you made of the conversation? I've loved having the opportunity to actually talk about all of this collectively, and the questions that Eva asked, I think they really made us start to think about things. Alex.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, don't worry. Alex. Ralph, go for it.
Well, I'm definitely going to re-listen to Astral Pleasures and think about who's the sculptor you said? Henry Moore.
Yeah.
Yeah, and think about Light, because that reminisces for me. And if anyone's listening, I recommend that Astral Pleasures one. There's definitely some kind of musical representing light there. I can definitely relate to that. But it's been great. I really enjoyed listening to Ralph talk about his music, because I follow Ralph and Issie. I've love listening to both of you talk about your music, because I've heard both of it before. And it's really interesting, Ralph, your duo with Cecilia, who I know. There's some lots of interesting recordings on Bandcamp. And also thanks, Eva. It's really nice to meet you. And I teach on the National Youth Orchestra composers, so I don't usually get to talk to jazz composers. So that is a great privilege. I wish I got to talk to jazz composers more often, because we resonate from our shared musical history. So thanks very much.
Well, I've already hatched some plans. I've already got some thoughts, because of the lovely thing of doing sound and music summer school as well as NYJC. I think we could create some opportunities to be talking about composition. Love for yourself and Ralph to be part of that. Ralph, have you enjoyed the conversation?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, I agree with everything everyone said. It's been a really nice to talk about the process. I feel like at the moment with the lockdown and things that are going on, we end up seeing a lot of people putting stuff up online, and you see people are putting up videos of them playing or live streams or whatever. But what we miss is actually getting to talk to other people about our music, and having a chat before a gig or in a rehearsal, trying to explain your process or whatever. And so it's nice to just talk to people about music again, and what they're doing and how they do it, and how they get around the same pitfalls that I fall into every single time. And yeah, great questions. Thanks, Eva, for all of those. Yeah, great.
So before we round off, and we're going to finish with a piece by Alex, just to say that, again, another lovely coincidence is that you talked about Pete Churchill, and Pete Churchill and Anita Wardell are going to be our guests next week, and they're coming to talk about the work that they do together with the London Vocal Project, and also particularly about the John Henricks and working on that project. And so great that they did it when they did, because, you know, a couple of years after finishing it, then John passed away because he was already in his senior years. And just for those of you not sure who he is, go away and listen to Lambert, Henricks and Ross. And that will give you an insight. So Lambert, Henricks and Ross, it's a 3-part vocal ensemble that was really famous in the 50s and 60s. And talking about counterpoint and harmony and feel and groove, all of it. It's really beautiful music. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank Nick very much for steering us through all of the digital and the signing up for things. And we're going to round off today with a final piece from Alex. And Alex, would you like to introduce it and explain? And I'd like to wish everyone a lovely evening, to see you next week. Over to you, Alex. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, silly grandpa, me. This piece is called Corn Crack Dreams, and it's a piece. It's kind of the first piece of music I'm working on at the moment. I'm really interested in exploring groove music a bit more, and it came out on the non-classical label on a compilation CD last week, and it's kind of a prelude to some stuff I want to work on in the coming months. Thanks so much for listening.
Okay.